Thanks everyone for joining us today. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this event to mark the centenary of the opening of the first birth control clinic in London and the UK. My name is Rebecca Simpson. I'm Head of Engagement at Senate House Library, and today with my colleague Mura Ghosh, we'll be exploring some of the female pioneers in medicine and some of the campaigners for women's rights and women's health. You can see us both here in green in this picture. This is at the launch of the Rights for Women exhibition in 2018 that we designed and curated together with our colleague Maria Castrillo here. And I promise you, we didn't coordinate our outfits. That was a complete accident. But before we start, I just want to let you know that we'll be recording this event and it'll be available on YouTube channel afterwards. To start things off, I'm going to hand over to Mura now, who will be talking about the pioneers coming forward.
All right, sorry for that. So thank you, Becca. That was a very nice introduction. I will be talking about controlling mind and body, which was one of our 4 main themes in our Rights for Women exhibition that Becca mentioned earlier. As we all know, the right to control our own fertility has been and continues to be one of the main issues in securing rights for women. In my presentation today, I will be looking through the lens of individual women's stories as they are reflected in our library's printed and digital collections, to try to paint a picture of the struggle for reproductive choices that took place in the first half of the 20th century. Some of these women are well-known campaigners and pioneers. However, some have been more or less forgotten. They all dedicated their lives to the cause of birth control and championed reproductive health and freedom through sex education, contraception, and later abortion. I will start with Marie Stopes, as Becca mentioned, which is most fitting since today we are celebrating exactly 100 years on 17th March 1921, since Mary Stopes and her husband Humphrey Verdon Roe founded the first birth control clinic in Britain, called the Mothers Clinic for Constructive Birth Control at 61 Marlborough Road in Holloway, a working class district in North London. I will then talk about a couple of women pioneers that came before Mary Stopes and a few others that followed her. So the Mothers Clinic was a turning point for the birth control movement. On the first day that the Mothers Clinic opened, a queue of women attracted by posters announcing the event waited outside. The clinic was free and open to all married women for education about birth control methods and reproductive health. Here's a photo of Stopes in her garden at her house in Surrey. In 1925, the clinic moved to Whitfield Street in Bloomsbury. In the first official report of the Mothers Clinic, entitled The First 5,000, Stopes claimed spectacular success. Only 31 of her patients, or less than 1%, she asserted, became pregnant while using the contraceptive devices her clinic recommended. By 1929, 10,000 women had received contraceptive advice. During the 30s, Stopes established a network of regional clinics in Leeds, Aberdeen, Belfast, Cardiff, and Swansea, modeled after the London Clinic. Stopes also operated 2 horse-drawn caravan clinics that traveled to small towns, the first such mobile clinics in the world. The Mothers Clinics were very carefully constructed spaces. They were private sanctuaries away from public spaces, painted a blue shade with furnishings resembling comfortable domestic sitting rooms. They radiated a sense of respectability. Highly qualified midwives, as you can see in this picture, who were also wives and mothers themselves, dispensed advice and fitted the vast majority of patients. Birth control, as taught in the Mothers Clinics, was something women had to do to maintain marital fulfillment and good health. To regulate her own fertility in this way, a woman often had to overcome the stigma that birth control had in many working class communities. Sex was taboo in most circles, and even feminists stayed away from birth control as an issue until long after the First World War. Many women were brought up to believe that contraception was shameful, and for some, simply visiting a clinic such as this was a subversive act. In her clinics, Stopes advocated 3 types of reproductive planning: preventing unwanted births, spacing children in a family, and helping couples who were infertile to conceive. She was opposed to terminations of pregnancy and instructed her midwives to educate women about the use of contraceptive technologies. Her preferred contraceptive device was the pro-race cervical cap. You can see the advertisement in this leaflet, which the London Rubber Company made to her specifications and packaged together with Stopes' letter to working mothers. Stopes' cervical cap was at the center of the debate in her libel case against Catholic Dr. Halliday Sutherland, who condemned her use of harmful methods of contraception. She seized the opportunity to further her cause by writing a scathing review in the first issue of Birth Control News. She won only a partial victory, but received enormous publicity as a result of the trial. You can see how well her books were selling over in the US. That Mary Stopes was a convinced eugenicist is now a well-established fact. In recognition of this, the charity Mary Stopes International recently changed its name to MSI Reproductive Choice in November 2020. However, she also held strong feminist and humanitarian beliefs reflected in her practical work in the clinic, where Stopes often violated her own proclaimed eugenic alliances in her concern for the health and happiness of the individual woman. All married women who asked for birth control at the mother's clinics would be fitted, regardless of their wealth or social standing. A caricature of eugenic thought can also be glimpsed in her didactic, propagandistic play, Our Ostriches, which was the only one of her plays ever to reach the stage and ran for 3 months at the Royal Court Theatre in London. We're now going to cast our eyes back to some of the controversies surrounding birth control in the 19th century. Opponents of birth control used existing laws regarding the dissemination of obscene publications in order to suppress popular medical brochures on sex education. This strategy was not always successful, as was clearly demonstrated by the result of the famous Knowlton trial in 1878, when a young woman, notorious as a charismatic freethinker, Annie Besant, defended the cause of population control and contraception in open court before an all-male jury. She was arrested and put on trial together with Charles Bradlaugh for publishing a reprint of Charles Knowlton's bestseller Fruits of Philosophy, advocating birth control for the poor. Her victory at the trial led to widespread publicity for contraception. On the strength of this, she went on to publish her own highly influential manual on ways to limit family size, The Law of Population, polarizing opinions in the media and the establishment, thus becoming the first woman in Britain to publicly support birth control. The Times accused her of writing an indecent, lewd, filthy, bawdy, and obscene book, whilst at the same time she gained support from some liberal politicians. The scandals cost Besant the custody of her children, no less. Annie Besant's international recognition spread in the decade following publication. Her book was hailed as a moral triumph for free thought in Australia, after a judge in New South Wales ruled that this book is neither obscene in language nor by its teaching incites people to obscenity. Here's an autobiography of Annie Besant and a photo of her house in Dulwich taken by Becca recently. The house has a blue plaque since 1963. The origins of the modern birth control movement grew out of the enormously influential Malthusian ideas in the 19th century, concerned with limiting population growth through preventative measures to reduce birth rates. Dr. Alice Drysdale Vickery was an outspoken supporter of birth control as a key aspect of the emancipation of women, and she lectured on this topic for more than a decade. She was a midwife and the first British woman to qualify as a chemist and pharmacist in 1873. She later also qualified as a physician in 1880 from the London School of Medicine for Women, only one of 5 women at the time. After she testified at the trial of Annie Besant and Charles Bradlaugh, Alice Vickery became one of the founders of the Malthusian League, with Annie Besant the secretary. The Malthusian League combined under one banner the majority of campaigners for birth control at that time, who fought the prevailing Victorian morality and tried to educate the public about the importance of family planning. Alice Vickery proposed a women's Malthusian League with a program of emancipation in 10 points, which you can see on the screen. This desire for further emancipation in the reproductive sphere found close affinity with the Neo-Malthusian movement, which campaigned for more systematic forms of birth control and advocated contraception. Alice Vickery was an early advocate of free love, and she campaigned for equal rights for children born out of wedlock. Moving on, another pioneer, abortion also played an important role in the birth control movement. Campaigners argued that abortion would be unnecessary and maternal health would improve if information on contraception was made available to working class mothers. Stella Brown was a radical who called herself a socialist and extreme left-wing feminist. She toured around the country campaigning for women's rights to contraception and legalized abortion, for women's health and sex education. Borno Victorian, Stella was one of the very few to challenge her generation's views on women's sexuality. She advocated women's right to control their bodies and sexual desires. She was the first woman to speak publicly on lesbianism and free love, and she published anonymously on sexuality in the subversive feminist journal, The Free Woman. She called for the legalization of abortions at the World Sexual Reform Congress in London in 1929. Protests over rising maternal mortality rates and the tireless work of many campaigning groups culminated with the formation of the National Birth Control Council in 1930. Stella Brown is known to women's history as a founder of the Abortion Law Reform Association. Like Stella Brown, Dora Russell was another prominent campaigner who played a crucial role in breaking down sex taboos and increasing knowledge about reproductive health. She joined H.G. Wells and John Maynard Keynes in founding the immensely influential Workers' Birth Control Group. In 1926, the House of Lords was the first legislative body in the world to support birth control as part of publicly funded medical services, which reflected a striking change in attitudes. In 1929, Russell organized the World League for Sexual Reform's highly successful Congress in London with the Australian-born birth control campaigner Norman Hare. The Congress was attended by leading intellectuals including George Bernard Shaw, Margaret Sanger from the United States, and Sigmund Freud, who debated topics ranging from psychoanalysis to prostitution and censorship to contraception. She wrote considerably and was mostly concerned with sex education. Her love of motherhood and children put her at odds with fellow feminists championing women's sexual freedom against marriage. But her candid autobiography reveals her views on liberated sex, which made her a new woman for the time. Her insights that the body is political, both in sex and in motherhood, put her ahead of her time in many, many ways. After Mary Stopes' first clinic, an increasing number of women's welfare centres offering advice to working class women in poor health opened in London. Marjorie Spring Rice chaired one such new clinic in North Kensington, spearheading the idea of broadening coverage beyond contraception to include marital problems. She was struck by the desperate need for facilities to improve the health of women and young children, and in particular by the need for the provision of contraceptive advice in the most deprived areas. From the start, Marjorie's vision for the clinic encompassed a much broader field than simply contraception. She worked hands-on in the clinic, which offered help with minor gynecological problems, children's ailments, marriage guidance, and advice on infertility. She carried out a large survey of married working women, which she then used in her writings to raise public concern for women's health due to frequent pregnancies, miscarriages, and gynecological ailments. She understood the cramped houses and lack of privacy of working class districts and the difficulty for women to use birth control effectively in these conditions. She believed that trained medical knowledge was essential in order to offer the best help to mothers. Marjorie developed family planning clinics throughout the 1950s, and she was a founding member of the National Birth Control Association, which later became the Family Planning Association, an independent coordinating body advancing the birth control movement and helping clinics promote medical research. Like Stella Brown, Helena Wright was a renowned educator, author, and campaigner who became a pioneer of family planning in Britain and internationally. In contrast with Mary Stopes, Helena believed that contraceptive advice should be given by specially trained gynecologists instead of midwives. She persuaded Marjorie Spring Rice, who employed her at the North Kensington Clinic, to lead a program of training in birth control, sex education, and therapy for medical students and nurses. She is best remembered for The Sex Factor in Marriage, published in 1930, a beginner's guide to sexual intercourse for married couples. It contains explicit instructions in the art of lovemaking. Despite the fact that this was considered taboo by the vast majority, many of whom unfamiliar at the time with the scientific terminology describing human sexuality, Wright's book became an instant bestseller with sales of over 1 million and translated into many languages. This book was also pivotal in persuading the Ministry of Health to withdraw all restrictions on contraceptive services by local authorities and to set up birth control clinics throughout the country in the 1930s. In the 1940s, Helena publicly expressed her support for abortion, and these views brought her often to the attention of the police. Now, this is the main biographical work on Helena Wright, which I thought it interesting to show here. Helena Rosa was born at Lowenfeld, shown here on the right-hand side of this picture, here and up here. She was the eldest of 2 daughters. Her sister, Margaret Lowenfeld, is now known amongst historians of psychology as a British pioneer of child psychology and play therapy. So both sisters deserve to be celebrated and studied as part of British women's history. The other photos here show Helena in the far right in this picture during her university days and on her marriage day. So I'm going to have to stop here with the stories of women fighting for our reproductive rights. And I'd like to say that this was just a glimpse into the vast number of resources in Senate House Library on women's history and the birth control movement. I hope that the images that you saw gave you a taste of what you can find in the library for your research, both in print and in electronic formats. And at the end of our presentation today, I will come back to give a short live demonstration of how to use the library's electronic resources for your research. Here on this list are some that I found to be particularly rich in content for this area. Okay, and I'm now going to pass on to Becca, who will carry on presenting more stories.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mura, for sharing those incredible stories. What wonderful pioneers. I'm now going to talk to you about pioneers in the world of politics and education. If you just give me one moment, I will share my screen. So at Senate House Library, we have some incredible archives here, and we have a photograph here of Emmeline Pankhurst alongside suffragettes and a lovely Votes for Women ribbon designed by Sylvia Pankhurst. They are obviously some of the most famous pioneers of women's rights, but for today's talk, I wanted to focus on the pioneers that specifically campaigned for women's health and welfare, that worked alongside the women that Mura just introduced. Senate House Library is proud to be part of the University of London, which was the first to approve special examinations for women in 1868. Here you can see the charter of 1867 with that amazing wax seal, which is roughly the size of a small dinner plate. That's what enabled the first women in the country to go to university. And it resulted in women from across the globe coming together either to attend university or to use it as a platform to establish practices. Here's a close-up of that charter. The first woman I wanted to introduce is Elizabeth Blackwell. She was a British physician, notable as the first woman to receive a medical degree in the United States and the first woman on the medical register of the General Medical Council. Blackwell played an important role in both the US and the United Kingdom as a social reformer and pioneer in promoting education for women in medicine. In July 1869, Elizabeth, feeling slightly alienated by the US women's medical movement, she left for Britain to try and establish medical education for women here. Just 5 years later, and after much campaigning, she worked together with Florence Nightingale, Sophia Jax Blake, Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, and others, creating the London School of Medicine for Women, the first medical school for women in England. That brings me on to my next woman to highlight, Sophia Jax Blake. She was a leading campaigner for medical education for women as well. And she was also involved with Elizabeth Blackwell in establishing the London School of Medicine for Women, but she also established one in Edinburgh, where she was born. She would later become one of the Edinburgh Seven, that campaigned for women to train and practice as doctors. As the women began to demonstrate that they could compete on equal terms with male students, hostility towards them began to grow. They received obscene letters, were followed home, had fireworks attached to their front door and mud thrown at them. When the women arrived to sit an exam at the Surgeons' Hall on the 18th of November 1870, an angry mob of over 200 were gathered outside to throw mud and rubbish and insults at the women. Despite the horrific actions of the mob, it ultimately led to more visibility and support for the women's campaign. Here is a photo of, well, not a photo, an image of the London School of Medicine for Women established by those women. Moving on to Rukmubai. In 1894, a well-known Indian feminist, Dr. Rukmubai, qualified in medicine after attending the London School of Medicine for Women. The number of Indian women students steadily increased, so that by 1920, the school, in cooperation with the India Office, opened a hostel for female Indian medical students. In 1914, the school was further expanded with around 300 students. And in 1998, it merged with University College Hospital's medical school to form the UCL Medical School, which is part of the University of London. But her journey to this point was far from easy. Rukmubai was born in 1864 at the age of 11, and at the age of 11, Rukmubai was married off to a 19-year-old man. Rukmubai challenged this in the courts, leading to the high-profile legal case. During the period of the court cases, Rukmubai wrote to the Times of India, and after a series of letters that became very popular under the pseudonym of the Hindu Lady. Rukmubai was only saved when Queen Victoria intervened and issued a proclamation dissolving her marriage and commuting the sentence. Her husband accepted a monetary compensation of 2,000 rupees in return for the dissolution of the marriage in 1888. The publicity of this case prompted the formation of the Age of Consent Act in 1891, which only raised it by a slight amount to the age of 12, and only fairly recently up until the age of 18. But after this, Rukmubai was finally free to pursue her education after the court cases had concluded, and that was under the guidance and support of Edith Phipson, the British director of the Kama Hospital in Bombay, and that's when she left for England. Here you can see this wonderful document that we have in the archives at Senate House Library. It's roughly about A3 in size, and it's a letter from various women in the medical profession, congratulating the University of London for admitting women and asking them to go further to recognise them on the same merit as men. Here you can see a close-up where you can see Elizabeth Blackwell has signed it, Sophia Jax Blake has signed it, and Elizabeth Garrett Anderson. The next lady I want to introduce is Clara Elizabeth Colette. She was one of the first women graduates from the University of London. She was a pioneer and social investigator, social reformer, writer, economist, and British civil servant. Clara worked as an investigator for Charles Booth's survey of the poor and working classes in London. She was considered the expert in women's work in Britain at the time and wrote chapters in Booth's masterpiece, The Labour and Life of the People of London. She focused on the East End of London in 1888, interviewing prostitutes and women from the sweated trades. This was an exquisite piece of research which was used to write her substantial section on women's work. Clara was pivotal in many social reforms that greatly improved working conditions and pay for women, and of course, by extension, improving their health during the early part of the 20th century. Moving on to Eleanor Rathbone, who was a lifelong campaigner for women's rights. In 1897, Rathbone became Honorary Secretary of the Liverpool Women's Suffrage Society and was elected MP for Liverpool City Council in 1909, a title she would hold for over 20 years. Rathbone would lead political campaigns in Liverpool and work to involve women in politics locally and nationally. She was instrumental in negotiating the terms of women's inclusion in the 1918 Representation of the People Act. Eleanor Rathbone used Parliament as her platform to make the case for family endowments. In her book, The Case for Family Allowances, she argues that to prevent child poverty, encourage lower birth rates and improve the health of future generations, it is imperative to introduce a state scheme that makes direct provision for the support of children. After much pressure from Rathbone and several women's organisations, the British wartime government eventually introduced a family allowances bill in 1945 that contemplated making payments directly to the mother. Eleanor's humanitarian work and publications highlighted the living conditions of destitute women and refugees during the war, put pressure on the government, and it earned her the nickname of MP for Refugees. Next, we have Sheila Rowbotham. Sheila's pamphlet, The Women's Liberation and New Politics, became the most influential manifesto in the women's liberation movement in Britain in the 60s and 70s. She argued that women's emancipation was a collective issue and relevant to the whole of society. Here she examines the social and economic nature of women's oppression and possible routes to liberation. With this manifesto, Rowbotham aimed to open up debate rather than provide final answers to a very complex issue. Through her pioneering approach to research and campaigning, which used a variety of sources, Rowbotham highlighted issues experienced by women not just in the UK, but across the globe. Rowbotham has examined the sexual and political beliefs of a variety of 19th and 20th century radicals and supported Stella Brown, whom Mura mentioned earlier, in the fight for legalisation of birth control. Next, I want to highlight Stella Dadzie. Stella Dadzie is a British educationalist, activist, writer and historian. She co-authored The Heart of the Race, Black Women's Lives in Britain with Suzanne Scaife and Beverly Bryan, which won the 1985 Martin Luther King Award for Literature. Stella was one of the founding members of the Organisation of Women of African and Asian Descent, OWAD, in the 1970s. OWAD organised demonstrations and campaigns around several key issues, including domestic violence, immigration and deportation, children's rights in schools, and anti-Black discrimination and policing. They also worked with AWAS, the first feminist Asian women's collective in the UK, demonstrating against racist immigration laws and the virginity tests against Black women at Heathrow Airport in the 70s. Here's a picture of the first meeting of OWAD in 1979. This is held at the Black Cultural Archives, and it's one of Stella Dadzie's collection. Moving on to Amrit Wilson, who is another pioneering activist and writer championing women's rights in the 1970s. She set up the first refuge run by and for Asian women. Amrit was one of the founder members of AWAS, the first Asian women's collective in the UK, and was involved and led several organisations and national networks of women's refuges to support Black, Asian, minority ethnic women and refugees. Amrit's book provides an account of the lives, struggles and aspirations of Indian women in Britain. It's based on interviews conducted by her with a wide range of women in London and beyond. She tells their moving life stories that explore attitudes towards love and marriage, family relationships and friendships, and the experience of institutionalised racism. The book was also awarded the Martin Luther King Memorial Prize shortly after publication. And here she is, both campaigning in the 70s, and a picture of her actually when we interviewed her for the Rights for Women exhibition. And it was a pleasure to work with Stella Dadzie and Amrit Wilson, who you can see here in the middle of the photograph, along with Frances Scott from the 50-50 Parliament campaign, which seeks to encourage more women to stand in Parliament, to stand up for women's rights. And on the right here, Dr. Sanya Ajasa, who is one of the current leading female pioneers. She's a doctor in the NHS. She's often given interviews to the media to support women's rights and, of course, in the wider medical profession. We held an event at Senate House Library, this is the periodicals room, where we held a women's parliament to discuss current issues and discuss the leading women of the day and how we can continue to support the hard-won victories that the women that Mura and I have outlined to you today, and how we continue their story into the present. That's the end of the women I wanted to share with you in this presentation. But before I hand over to Mura to just show you the online resources, I wanted to show you some of the other amazing things we have at Summit House Library in our collections. One of which is Dr. Anne Kendall, OBE, pioneering archaeologist. She went to in 1978, she went to Peru, to the area you're probably more familiar known as Machu Picchu. She's seen there crossing the rope bridge in Urubamba, and on her back there is not a backpack, it's her baby. So she made incredible journeys at great lengths to re-establish the community, look at irrigation to improve the community. And she worked with women in the community with their children to work out different systems that would benefit them and improve their system of governance and improve medical care and education. We also have wonderful photos at Senate House Library. Here's one of Greenham Common women here. And actually Stella Dadzie was attended Greenham Common in the 70s, one of the only Black women there. We also have a number of pamphlets, which are more DIY nature, created by grassroots communities. Here you have Black Eye Perceptions, which is a wonderful Brixton-based publication, and Feminist History in the East End, which is a walk where you can discover a lot of the stories of the women that were discussed here and where they lived and the area of impact. We also have some amazing letters in our collection from leading women such as Virginia Woolf that are very much worth exploring. There's also some more quirky documents. We have a library of magical literature by Harry Price. And as part of an exhibition recently, we looked to improve women in our collections as part of that magical library to show that women were prevalent in the magic scene, and that they were moving from merely being a magician's assistant to actually taking the public role themselves, which gives another aspect to women's history. And finally, we recently purchased this amazing album of Edwardian theatre pamphlets by Dorothy Gould. It's an incredible collection showing a London theatre goer at the time. And one of the amazing pamphlets in the collection is the Votes for Women play, which was by Elizabeth Robbins in 1907, the first suffrage drama. Again, it's items like these in the library that really show the breadth of women's campaigning in all the varieties of methods, whether it's in politics, education, or on the stage. It really is an honor to be able to share these with you today. So I'm now going to hand over to Mura to show you our online collections.
Thank you, Becca. That was amazing. Just looking at these items again with just on the screen, but you know, it's just whetting my appetite to go back to work on site to start working with these collections in the office. What I'm going to do now, very briefly, hopefully no more than 5 minutes, is to take you through the journey that you might follow when you are online looking at our library resources, or when you're in the library and you're trying to find things amongst our electronic resources, digital collections that supplement what we have showed you in print. So I don't know how many of you are already members of the library, or are thinking of becoming members, or have visited the library. This is our library main website. Can you see it? Can you see the screen?
Yep, that's showing me.
Okay, perfect, excellent. Okay, so from the library main website, we have a section here called Databases and E-Resources. Okay, on this page, you will find information about conditions of use, including permitted use under our license agreements with publishers and suppliers, and some information about copyright. What we're doing now is going directly to the e-resources. Here, there's very useful information about who has access to the databases and how you can access them on-site and off-site. Okay, we will go now to our listing, A to Z listing of all our resources. And you can see that currently we subscribe to about 372 databases. This page enables you to browse these databases alphabetically. So this way, or you can click on a letter, or you can search them, you can look at them by type. So these are the subjects that we cover in our subscriptions. Database types, there are all kinds of things. We have bibliographic, citation databases, newspapers, open access resources, and primary source resources. Or you can go and look at them by vendor. You can also search these databases for a specific topic, in this case, women. Okay, and what we want now is to look at primary source databases that contain digitized material, that particularly those that are rich in material for women's history research. So you can see we've ended up with about 16 databases of primary source materials for women's history. Now, on my last slide earlier in my presentation, I listed some of the main resources I think that are really good for research into women's history. So I'm going to focus on one of them now, just trying to demonstrate one of the best of our resources, one of the largest digital archive that enables us to search across multiple databases and multiple contributing libraries. Senate House Library is one of the main contributors to this resource, with a vast number of items from our Goldsmith collection of economic and social history digitized for this particular product, the making of the modern world. The Gale Platform here offers a very sophisticated functionality for searching. So you can search all across these 9 databases, or you can select a specific one to do your research on. I'm going to do a multiple database search, and I'm going to do a simple keyword search on our topic of today, birth control. Okay, keep going. So the results, yes, this is the results page. They're grouped by content type here, very helpfully. We have monographs, manuscripts, and newspapers and periodicals. If we take a look at manuscripts here, the results can be grouped by, can be filtered by, or arranged again by date and by document title. Each of these items here will have, let's look at this one here, will have a brief description, you can see it here, and the archival source to which the document belongs. In this case, this particular document comes from the Lesbian Her Story archives in New York. You can look at, you can do a preview of the keywords, which is very helpful to see how many times and where your keyword that you searched on appears in the document. And this gives you an idea of how helpful this document is likely to be, okay, without having to go in and open the whole thing. If you do open the document, okay, what you will find is, it's a very nice poster actually that calls people to a rally in New York on abortion. But this is not just one item, it's actually a bunch of items. There are 11 of them all together in this digitized format. And you can see them listed right here on the left-hand side. Okay, right. You can view these items, so you can actually browse, you can go through page by page browsing, or you can go straight to one particular document that you want to see. So say we wanted to go to this item on page 2, so that's what happens here. Then page 3, we can see another item. Okay, you can also search your terms within this particular set of documents. So there is a search term hits. So, you know, these are pages within the selection of items that will have your term, birth control. Okay, and we can actually make this big on the screen, so you can make it easier to read. Okay, make it full screen. Or let's say this page again. Right. Okay. There's an important functionality here for citations. So if you're interested in full citations for the item, you can have a look here on this side. And then I found this very helpful in many cases where the item contains drawings or photographs or diagrams. You can go straight to them. So for example, here, you can see only the diagrams or the drawings in this document. Okay. Or their photographs or diagrams. Another important thing to remember that all of the databases will have different functionalities, but most of them will have the ability for you to cite the work. So this is full citation information for this particular item, and you can format the citation according to the style preferred. You can also send this document to your email or your online storage space. You can download, you can print, and you can get a link. Okay, so if we go back to the results list, there are further options to filter your results. So we still have quite a lot, just over 1,200 manuscripts, and we have over 11,000 newspapers and periodicals. So you can continue to filter these results down by source, by the library that contributes these records, by the type of document. There's a very broad selection of types of documents, as you can see. Testimonials, there's all kinds of telegrams, so you can choose to see only those. You can also look at the documents by the authors. So the indexes are really strong in Gale, so you will have all the authors indexed for each particular set of documents. You can also look at the people discussed in these items, again indexed very well. And you can also search for further topics. You can narrow your selection by further searching within this group of items. Say, for example, Mary Stopes or abortion, you can go and narrow down this result to a further subset. And now, just to end this very, very quick demonstration, there's a lot more to do in this database and a lot more to see. But just to end with a couple of things that I found uniquely helpful in this database is the term frequency tool, which is very useful for data analysis. So if you're looking at a particular concept, so let's say we're looking for abortion. It comes up with a timeline of documents that have focused on this particular concept throughout time. So 1820 would be the earliest. So you can see the spikes here at different points in time. If you click on any of these dots here, you will see a list of a number of documents, and you can actually, if you click on them, I'm not going to do that now, but you will get the list of all those documents that had to do with abortion at that particular time period. So I found that very useful, a very useful tool when you're looking back, and especially when you're looking at data to get some idea of how the concept has moved over time. And the other one, the last feature I wanted to show you is the topic finder, which is a very visual way of looking at the content. Let's try again, abortion. Okay. you will get a display of the topics, all the topics, narrower topics connected to abortion in a sort of tile format here, or you can visualize it in a wheel format. So that enables you to select, for example, campaign, and then you get a whole list of documents related to abortion campaigns. And that's another way of going into the database via specific topics and sort of a visual framework of analyzing the data. And then, of course, all of these links will lead you to the full text of these items. Okay, so I hope this gave you some insight into how you can use digital resources. I'm going to unshare my screen now. I can. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mura. That's fascinating to see all the functionality of those resources and how you can use them to helpfully search for, to do your own research. And so now we've got 15 minutes left. I just wanted to open the event to any questions, and if anyone's got any. And if you'd like to raise your hand to speak directly, or you can put it in the chat, please do go ahead. We're keen to create a community here for this event. So if you would like to speak up, that would be great. I see we've got one message in the chat that can you list the resource links in the chat. We will certainly send all the resources that we've mentioned in the event today, along with the slides and everything, in an email to you via Eventbrite following the event, so we can list it all there for you.
Can I also say that the academic librarians in our team, it's myself and my colleagues, who are very happy to talk to you more about how to search, about literature reviews, about building a bibliography. And we all have now got a way of booking appointments with us online. So if you want to meet us and talk about your research and sit down online to do more of what we've done today, then we're very, very happy to do that. So yeah, you can find them, our availability online.
Absolutely, and indeed we're keen if there's a particular subject that you'd like more information on, we might be able to hold an event to help you with researching that. We do a series of online inductions throughout the year on a variety of different topics that show you how to use the various library resources. Just looking at the chat, we've got a couple of chat messages. Just want to say thank you very much for the talk. I can't wait for the library's lockdown is over. So you and me both. Mustache for the school run. The trials and tribulations of being a mother. And a comment from Helen. I hadn't heard about the virginity test at the airport that you mentioned. It sounds horrific. And what was the stated purpose of this practice? Yes, indeed. Through my research, I was stunned to see that. I don't have much detail to give you now, but it's something I'm going to be looking into, and certainly I'm going to be contacting Stella Dadzie to ask her about that information about that event and how they basically got that campaign going to stop these tests that sound, quite frankly, horrific and really intrusive to women arriving in the country. We'll provide links to that when we send the details of resources and everything in the email. We have a comment here. It's a very interesting talk. In light of the recent events over Sarah Everard, do you see a change in women's rights being established to be able to walk the streets safely? A good question, and it's certainly a reason why we wanted to do this event today, to not only to mark this milestone in women's history, but also to highlight, you know, that these hard-won victories by the women that we featured today are by no means guaranteed, and indeed they are debated all the time in Parliament by successive governments. And I'm sure you're all aware that, you know, the policing around this event is very much the topic of the moment. And indeed with the policing bill in Parliament, it's something being debated. And I'm sure, you know, it is very important for women today to continue these hard-won rights that these women have achieved for women, to continue them and to engage with any kind of surveys that the Home Office are doing. There's one currently at the moment, so I recommend people fill that out to give your perspective and help change legislation or indeed defend the rights that these women have helped to establish. If there are any more questions, there are, we mentioned the Rights for Women exhibition that many of these women feature in. That is available on the website still, so you can go and explore some more there. There's an image gallery, there's videos, and indeed we created a video interviewing Stella Dadzie and Amrit Wilson about their experiences and the women that inspired them and what they hope for future generations, which I think is a really important resource to be able to continue. So do have a look on our website. I'm just going to share my screen quickly with you now. A second. So this is an example from the Rights for Women exhibition. This is the exhibition guide. And you can see here one of the double pages in the exhibition guide that show you so many of the women. We wanted to give them a platform for their words, and there's many quotes in there and details about the work they did. And again, it's filled with resources that you can help to build your research and explore some more stories. I just have a, if there's any more questions, I think we're now almost at 3 o'clock. Are there any more questions?
It's just a statement saying that it's good to spread the word about women we don't know, which is what we're trying to do with
Absolutely. Keep these women's stories going. They need to be unearthed and keep repeating, because as we mentioned, these rights are very hard won and they are always being tested. There's no guarantee that these will continue. And it's really important that we build on these women's work and don't forget them. And so if there are no more questions, I thought it would be really great to end with a quote. This is from Clara Colette. We owe much to the women who, at the risk of great unpopularity and much social loss, fought the battles by which the doors were opened, through which others pass without one effort of their own. And I think that really sums up all those amazing women and the women that we share with you today. So thank you all for coming, and we will now bring this event to a close. Thank you.
Thank you.